Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in.
Welcome, listeners. Excited that we don't have a guest today, but Elizabeth's acting as our guest today, where I'm going to be interviewing her a little bit about her work as a consultant in the IO space and kind of getting to know her a little bit better.
Yeah, excited to share a little bit about my world in a little bit more detail. I know we've given a lot of hints and different pieces of things that you and I both do over the episodes. So it'll be fun to kind of dig in.
Yeah. So our listeners, some of them might know that you do have a consulting firm. So why don't you start by giving us a little bit of an introduction to the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So my firm, the name is Apidae Consulting. I started the firm back in 2024. I've worked for previous, other firms, working for someone as a W-2 employee, but have decided to start my own and kind of bring my own touch to the work that I do with clients. So I am focused a lot on leadership development, on retention of employees and utilizing kind of various strategies to help with retention, as well as offering trainings in different areas, things like leadership, building psychologically safe workspaces, and things like that. So started it back in 2024 and things are going really well. I work with a lot of different types of clients, which I absolutely love because I love variety. So I do a lot with, nonprofits, government agencies, as well as for-profit companies.
Yeah, great. How would you say your approach is different than other consulting firms?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And honestly, I think it comes from my background and my education in the counseling and clinical space. So while I'm not utilizing, therapeutic techniques in my work with clients, I think it gives kind of the way that I think about people and I think about people within an organization is a little bit more holistic, maybe a little bit more wide reaching, if you will. And so for me, I think it's really about, companies and businesses are entities, right? We know they have structures and systems and all of those things, all which are incredibly important for the business itself. But businesses are made up of people, and people are not as simple as a process or a system, right? And so I think my approach to it is a lot more holistic, looking at a lot of different areas, understanding who somebody is, not just from, what is their work style, which is important, don't get me wrong, but also looking at, what are they motivated by? What are things that are really draining for them? What is their personality like? How do they solve problems? What does their emotional intelligence look like? How do they interact with other people? And so it's really about kind of looking at the whole person and how each of those pieces come together to make the person who they are. I will say, like, the example that I give, and this might land for some people, one of the scales that we measure is dominance or assertiveness, right? Assertiveness looks different for different people, right? If you're really empathic, for instance, your assertiveness is probably, and I'm kind of generalizing a little bit, but is most likely less domineering than someone who maybe just doesn't have as much interest in the experience or the emotional experience of other people. So being able to describe that in a way that's true and authentic for the person, while also giving them the tools to decide how do they want to grow, and what do they want to tap into.
Yeah, knowing obviously your background in counseling and the clinical psychology sphere, we know, and Prue here, my dog is joining me, I guess. So we know that you apply a psychological approach to what you're doing with retention in the workplace. Mm-hmm. One thing I would challenge is, sometimes you are looking for certain types of personalities or a certain level of domineering potentially in the space, but at the same time, you might not be looking for that. Or you already have people in place and you didn't know what their personalities were. And so there's a huge interplay between, what the company wants and aligning how the person's personality with the company needs and wants, kind of goes into skill sets, growth opportunities, all of that. I feel like you can definitely tell we've had a theme going in the past month, talking a little bit more about the holistic side of work and life. I sometimes say, like, okay, yes, there's a work-life balance, but there's a work side to it and there's a life side to it. So oftentimes people say, oh, I want a work-life balance, meaning they want to work 10 hours and get paid for 40. I've heard that in the past. I'm like, no, there's a work-life balance. So balancing the two. And if you can connect them in a way that work doesn't seem so much like work anymore, it's something you're passionate about, you're making a difference and doing whatever you're doing, you find meaning in it, no matter what that job is, then you're going to be better off. And holistically, it's usually connected to your well-being as a person. If you're passionate about the project, you're more easily to remotivate yourself, prevent burnout. And I think there's a level of building ownership in preventing your own burnout and motivating yourself as a team member. But it all does start with the employer trying to recognize what motivates, what causes burnout. How can I get this person or teach this person to prevent their own burnout?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think, like, kind of hearing what you're saying, to me, it's not like it's a hard and fast rule, but I kind of think about the life cycle of an employee, for instance, right? What you're talking about from a business perspective of what type of person, what personality features, what motivational, attributes does someone need to be successful in this role and to be what the company needs. Often that's when companies call me and say, we need help determining who's the best fit for a role, right? And so that's kind of that pre-hire assessment, trying to identify those things that can also come into play with teams. And you kind of alluded to this too, where sometimes there's gaps in teams. You may have a team that's really functioning well, but gosh, they just really need this particular skill set that they don't have. How do you find that in a way that is more, let's say, objective, right? Because let's be honest, I mean, I know for myself, like and I'm not trying to be egotistical, but I'm a pretty good interviewer, right? I can interview really well. Now, there's a lot of people who can interview really well, but we really kind of need to know what, like, the deep down kind of attributes of the person are to really make sure that this is maybe the right fit, right? Because you might have 3 candidates that on paper look very similar, right? But how do they differ, and what does that look like? So again, going back to the life cycle thing, it's the pre-hire stuff, right? Maybe identifying, but then it's how do you best onboard someone, right? Because not everybody learns the same way. And so how can you tailor onboarding in a way that's going to get them up to speed a lot quicker, a lot, faster and more effectively, right? So that same data you get from the beginning can be utilized in onboarding, which then can be used in further development. So yes, a lot of my relationships with clients are long lasting and they, last for years and years a lot of times. And it's not like they have to redo it all the time for the same person.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Find a process by which they kind of go, and then they are better able to, attach the people they are interviewing with the company. So once you really get it, like you start to first connect the people in your company, and then you add people on. And I will say this dog has never sat on my lap, so this is new. Soon enough she'll have a big head and she'll just be in the camera anyway because she's a great Dane. But
we should add her as a co-host, I think.
Yes, I think she's our guest today. So the people that are watching over by video, you can see my dog here. She has an ottoman next to me, so she's supposed to be sitting on that, but she's on my seat. But anyhow, there is a gradual work and change management that you need to do when it comes to people. And one thing you say is a lot of your relationships are long lasting. Well, that's because people are always going to be around, and there's always going to be challenges with people. There's always going to be changes in an organization, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And so it's about navigating those changes with the people operations of that company. You can't change a company in 2 weeks, 2 months. It takes a lot longer to do that. And it takes a lot of self-reflection on both the company side, the employer side, leader side, and just general employee side of things. because unfortunately, I feel like sometimes you figure out certain person's not the right fit for your company, or they realize that. It's not a bad thing. That just means there's someone better for that position, and there's another company better for that person too.
Right.
Obviously, that's something you want to avoid because you want to retain. And more often than not, someone is attracted to a company because of what the company does, not necessarily just to have a job. And so there is an alignment there. You just need to find it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think from a business perspective too, I mean, you know, it's frankly, it's very expensive to hire someone, onboard someone, get them up to speed, and then find out they're not the right fit. And I know, like, historically, that's been I think maybe a bigger issue than it maybe is today. I think people are starting to realize that maybe there are, consultants or tools or whatever it may be that can help us identify some of those competencies that we need, and if the person, really exhibits those. So it's definitely not like everyone uses this tool, but I will say a benefit to the company from an assessment perspective and is that they do end up saving money in the long run. Mm-hmm. And I would argue too that I think a lot of organizations, if they don't have IO folks or OD folks, organizational development people working for them, it's a little harder to identify what should that assessment look like. I know, I think I've probably talked about it on the podcast before, but it's, is there that silver bullet, the one tool that's going to tell us everything? And what I know from both my clinical side of the world and from my IO side of my work is that there isn't one tool that can do it all. We'd love to think that there is, but there's not, because inherently there's, in some ways there's bias, right, in the hiring process because it is subjective. Do I like the person? Am I in a good mood when I interview them? Like, there's all those pieces, right? But even when you just look at it from test construction and the reliability and the validity of assessments, a test is designed to measure a construct, right? And so if you're only measuring one construct, say behavior, you're not getting the full picture of who someone is. So finding that silver bullet, that one test, in my mind, is just not possible. And the other thing I'll say, again, this is a huge thing that we teach in the clinical side, is that you need to have some kind of I don't know how to say this, like you need to basically be able to confirm. So typically, like in a clinical world, if you're giving a personality test, you don't just give one, you give two, so that you can confirm or validate what you are seeing with the person. That's an approach that I take. Similarly, it doesn't mean that it costs exponentially more money. It actually probably is about the same or less than what it might be to use one of these big tools that are shiny and like lovely. And I think it's also about just making sure that you're choosing the right consultant or the right tools for your organization. And also, I think as a consultant, to me, it's important to be flexible, because what works for one company may not work for another. And so I like to think about it as kind of having like a toolbox of different things that I can pull from so that I can meet the needs of the company in a way that's going to be most beneficial to them, not just because it's a one-size-fits-all solution.
No, yeah, I completely agree there. And, we've talked about it before. There are intervention methods for companies, but that doesn't mean that intervention method can just be used as it was said. You have to specialize it to your company either way. And so oftentimes you need to change up that survey a little bit. You need to change up how you're measuring something, or change roughly what you're measuring, or how, like, the timeline to it. She's truly sitting on my seat right now, Prue, is my dog. So this is pretty funny, I can say. But what would you say some of the main mistakes are, or potentially weaknesses are, that companies tend to embed into their process, causing, higher turnovers, or even, sometimes when they're trying to retain employees? Would you say that you see any trends for things companies do that they think helps retain, but doesn't actually work?
That's a solid question. I think some of this is based loosely on research that's available. So I'll throw that out there. I don't have, like a a research study that's out there right in front of my face right now, but excuse me, from some of the research that I've read, as well as just my own kind of anecdotal, and like whatever experiences, all of that, I would say there's a couple of different things. So going back to what I just said about choosing a tool and thinking that's the one right thing. A lot of times, and I'm not going to name tools, but I can imagine people might think about different colors to describe who they are, or maybe specific letters to describe, right? Like those things can be beneficial in the right time and place, but they're not going to help you retain an employee. To me, I've not seen it go well. I think the other part is that, and this also comes from working in HR. So Morgan, I'm sure you can attest to this too. A lot of times people think more money, just give them more money and they'll stay. But the truth of the matter is that is not the strongest motivator. And research shows us that is most definitely not the strongest motivator time and time again after different research studies for why people stay.
Oh, you're so funny. You're preaching my language, because, I had a supervisor say, well, do you think we can pay them more? And I'm like, I'm worried about losing them. And I'm like, if pay is the reason, like, if you think we're going to lose someone, pay is not going to keep them. It won't. And I'm like, and second to that, if they're not asking for more money, I'm not going to pay them more money. And third to that, they're getting paid higher than the average, salary, normal to their position. So I'm definitely not going to pay them more. I'm like, so if there's an issue with retention, what are you doing that isn't showing that you value them? That is causing potentially burnout, that's causing disinterest. Have you tried to build alignment between the process and their interests, their values and the company's values? Have you talked to them about that? He's like, no. Like, right. So again, you just want me to throw more money? It's like throwing mud at a wall and see if it'll stick.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, we know, like, if somebody is, if I'm not happy in my job, right? If I'm not happy in my job, or I'm thinking about leaving, or I'm starting to look on LinkedIn or somewhere else to see what jobs are out there, that idea is already in my head. So you might give me more money, I might stay for a little bit, but if it's not followed up with feeling, with the company or your supervisor or your boss or whomever, finding like value and showing that you are a value to the organization, and recognizing you for those things, and helping you find a space that fits for you, that thought's already in their head. Like, I'm already out because I've already been looking, you know?
I can kind of compare it to burnout. Like, they're feeling burnt, and that's probably why they want to leave. It might not even be related to the company or an issue with the company. They're just burnt. And so giving them the tools to prevent that burnout in the future, but helping them get over that burnout in the meantime is super important.
Absolutely.
I definitely have team members all recognize and be like, oh, they're seeming like they're a little burnt. And I'm like, okay, just so you know, I'm taking this responsibility away because I want you to go and use this time for something that you're passionate about in the organization. It sounds weird to do that, but it actually, I'm like, you need to have a little bit of fun in your life. And it might be because maybe outside of work, they're having life issues, whether that be family health issues or relationship issues. Not to say that people shouldn't do their work because they have other life issues going on, but just to give them something fun and different to do, to re-engage them in a way. And like I said, like, aligning those values. So oftentimes when you return to why you were passionate in the first place about something, that helps like prevent your burnout. Oftentimes I'll tell my managers, like, if you're feeling stressed, first, no, you can always come to me and talk to me. And then second to that, when you're feeling stressed, I want you to take a moment and think, why do I love being here? Why do I love what I do? What started me on this path? Right. Yeah. And why do I continue on it? Not do I want to continue on it? Why do I want to continue? Right.
Yeah, kind of focusing on that why, and I completely agree with you. I think where I will expand further, and this is something that I talk a lot about with my clients, and maybe also a bit of a different differentiator for me, because again, there's not a one size fits all solution. So for one person, like the person you're describing, having that extra time, maybe redistributing responsibilities is what they need, right? But I think that foundationally, leaders need to find a way to connect with their people, not just on a professional level, but also on a personal one. Now, I'm not saying mean that you have to be the leader who's going, tell me all of your deep, dark secrets. That's not what I'm saying. But you as a leader, it's your responsibility to create an environment where people feel safe to come and talk with you and say, I'm feeling burned out or I'm struggling. Because truly what we know about about psychological safety and psychological well-being, again, maybe pulling back from the counseling side of the world, is it's not just, you don't go from thriving to burnout like that. You just don't. If you as a leader are paying attention, you will see steps along the way where people, it's not like they're deteriorating to a point where they're not functioning, but you will see points along the way. So how can you create an environment that allows people to come and say, you know what, I'm struggling with this thing, or man, this is starting to bug me a little bit. So you can intervene earlier so that hopefully they don't even get to the point where you're dealing with burnout.
Yeah, you should
people.
Yeah,
right?
You should be recognizing the moods of your people consistently. And I will say it's more of a challenge for those remote environments because you can't see those people, but that's why it's important to have some sort of collaborative effort or some sort of check-in daily to see if that person's, responsive, or if you can tell that something's just off. Usually you can, and I challenge that leaders need a very high level of emotional intelligence. They really do. I often say I would love to stick my psychology brain into every single one of my leaders on my team so they just get it.
Right.
At times, and not everyone does because they were raised differently and they have different levels of emotional intelligence.
We're different people.
Yeah, they're all different people, and even the way they would approach it is naturally going to be different. That's when you teach them the situational leadership and how to approach it differently for different situations and different people, yada, yada, all that. But
absolutely,
you should be able to get a temperature on your people constantly. Now, I will warn, sometimes you might have someone in a bad mood. What if they were disciplined or they had corrective action happen? Well, that's probably why they're in a bad mood. And so don't necessarily need to cheer them up or consider it burnout at that moment in time because they had some
situational, right? There's the context matters more than we think that it does. I think that's what you're describing is it does matter, like what the context is. And, honestly, I think there are simple things that leaders can do, like things like it doesn't have to be this big earth shattering thing. Simply asking, how's it going today? Right? Because you've created the environment where people are free to share honestly how they're feeling, you can ask that question. How are you feeling today? Or how's it going? Or if they are getting closer to burnout, I'm noticing that maybe you're feeling a little bit burned out. I'm worried about you and I want to make sure I can get you what you need. What would be most helpful for you right now? Because the answer might not be, I need you to take away my responsibilities. The answer might just be, I just need somebody to listen. That's it. And so starting the conversation that way and asking them, what do you need today? And is beneficial. And I'm going to use my and, not the but, and allowing for that to change over time. Because what I need today might be for you, Morgan, to listen to me, to hear where my frustrations are. But what I might need tomorrow is for you to help me to come up with a solution for it. So being able to adapt to the changing needs of people, that's no different than what happens in our personal life. I actually run a workshop, like a corporate workshop with a colleague of mine who focuses more on like family and parental kind of conflict and well-being and that kind of stuff. And we've joined forces with that idea, going back to what we were talking about before, join forces in a way that allows us to talk about what does effective leadership look like when you're at home as maybe a parent or a partner or whatever it may be. And what does it look like at work? And how can we use those transferable skills to blend the two? To me, that's a healthier way to think about work-life balance, right? Because we don't need this skill set over here and then the skill set over here. We can use them.
They relate. I talk about parenting all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you parent your kids? You should be using those skills when you're talking to your team as well.
Gosh. I do that with my kids all the time. Like I'll say to my 9-year-old, Kate, how are you feeling today? And, or, hey, you're working on your homework. You seem a little bit frustrated. How can I help you right now? What would be most helpful? Like, that's no different than what I do with my mentees or employees that, I work with, or my clients even. Like, what can I help you with today? and then being able to adapt to that, I think is also quite important.
Yeah, definitely building this culture of openness and open communication and open sharing. Like even you as a leader should be sharing things that you might not be sharing with the average workplace in a way. You know, I'll note, like right now I have a head cold, and I'll note it, hey, just so you know, like I have a head cold, sorry, I'm a little stuffy, just as a heads up, might lose focus a little quicker. Something like that. But it also tells them I'm here despite my head cold, so I'm leading by example too. Because it's not like a sick in bed head cold. It's just annoying, and I'm drinking tea and I'm good to go. So it's also leading by example. So you're open, you're communicative, you explain how you feel, so then it makes others want to. Sometimes not everybody will want to share what's going on. They might be a little down, and you might know that they're not really a sharer, but you can kind of give them that boost of confidence. Be like, hey, I noticed that you seem a little down, a little stressed. Just want to let you know that you are doing a great job, and keep up the good work. If you do need anything, I am here. That's another way I've approached it with certain people, because they're not necessarily the ones that want to talk about it, but just letting them know that you're there gives them ease. And it's just like that. You see them, like I can usually see them take a breath, and their shoulders drop, and they're like, okay, I can breathe now.
Yeah. I mean, that's being seen and being valued. Like I think sometimes we as people think we need to, again, do these big earth shattering things, these huge interventions, and simply seeing people and hearing them, like I don't think we give it enough credit. Like, so what you just said about, I'm noticing that maybe you feel a little bit stressed right now. I know those aren't the exact words you use, right? But just the act of noticing has a profound impact on the person. That's it. That's simple, and it's easy, right? Like, so there you go, everyone in the world, just giving you a tidbit of information. Just notice what's happening around you.
And I do like to note, like with the context, I had a situation recently where you could tell someone wanted attention. But it was for negative reasons. And so then it's don't react to this person. Instead, you kind of just continue working, and you keep a happy, healthy environment elsewhere in the meantime, because that's definitely something that you sometimes get. You know, it doesn't mean it's every day. This person's usually great. It's just kind of an odd circumstance, or not really an odd circumstance, but it had to do with the disciplinary corrective thing.
Well, there's the thing, right? Like, I'd argue that there's an underlying reason for maybe why that behavior is happening. And so as a leader, it's still important for you to know what that underlying reason is, because if it's happening now, and there's a good chance that it may happen again.
Yeah, and it's important to respond effectively. So if there's an underlying reason they're reacting in a certain way for the attention, like they're attention seeking in a way, but there's nothing truly wrong, like they were in the wrong in some way, shape, or form. They had a conversation about it, and now they're in a bad mood. Okay, well, understandable that they might be in a bad mood. Not okay for it to last 2 weeks, but understandably they might be in a bad mood for a tiny thing they were disciplined on. But they need to take a breath, and they need to an extent, grow up. So at that moment in time, we don't give attention to that, and we keep the energy happy and healthy despite it, more so than anything. So that's kind of like a funny little tidbit that I like to share.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah, but Elizabeth, what is next for Apidae Consulting? What on the horizon?
Yeah, I think for me, it's continuing to refine what it is that we offer. It's building that toolbox so that, again, we can meet the needs of organizations that are different, or don't see things the same way or operate in the same way. So it's continuing to make those modifications, building that toolbox are two of the big things that I'm really focused on. I also really am a teacher as well. And so I love teaching, and I love training and all of those things. And so, looking to bring some of this knowledge, some of these, helpful interventions, whatever it may be, to other organizations. That's not something I've done as explicitly in organizations I've worked for in the past. And so that's something I'd like to bring to people. But ultimately for me, I'm not a believer in being in competition. I think there's enough work to go around. There's enough people in this world that need some support. And so for me, it's about finding those partnerships, those kind of working with people, working with other organizations maybe, so that we can bring change to the world in a way that's going to be powerful and meaningful and impactful. And so I probably will have some news. I'm working on a pretty big project with a very, very large organization that is known across the world. And so I'm really excited about that. I can't say a whole lot right now because there's no contract signed yet, but we'll share it when we get there. It's a place for clinical people. It's a place for IO people. And so there's a lot coming in this world, and I'm really excited about building those partnerships and making change.
Yeah, love to hear it. Obviously, there are so many different industries in the world, but in the end, people are involved in all of them, and that's why psychology belongs in all of them. I would challenge that IO is probably, well, obviously there are sales in almost everything too, but I would challenge that IO is probably the one piece that that people can get educated on that they can take to any industry, anywhere.
Yeah. It's a very underutilized resource in my mind, and one that needs more education, which is part of the reason we started this podcast, right? So I would hope, and my desire is to see more people like us, more IO practitioners out there working and bringing the people into the business a little bit more,
just really how you can connect yourself to every industry. You're not just a specialist in IO, but you're a specialist in the industry that company's focused in, because you have to understand all the stakeholders to make the best effective change.
And you learn the industry. That's something we can, we can teach you. We can teach you the industry. We can do that. It's the more nuanced pieces of understanding people that I really think IO brings to the table in a really effective way.
Yeah, I know. That's that challenge of IO isn't HR, HR isn't IO, but there's a connection.
Oh, you might work in HR. It's a possibility, but it's
what I do.
Kind of like a mindset. IO to me is more of a mindset. So.
Yes, I completely agree. I think, and especially the way in which I approach HR is, it's HR. Yes, there is the documentation and there's the hard facts and there's the legalities of it, but more so than anything, IO, when incorporated into HR, makes HR that much more effective, because you're building alignment between the actual people operations of a company and that back end legal knowledge. And so when you can connect the two, you have that greater alignment across the organization and the business strategy. So that's obviously, I'm a business strategist, and so it just becomes that much more successful. Making your people successful in turn makes the company successful, and vice versa. So I think IO is a mindset. I completely agree. And I think leaders, even if you didn't study psychology, can have an IO mindset.
I would agree. Absolutely. That's part of what I'm here to help develop, right? So
yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this conversation. It was really great. I'm excited to also have this conversation with you in the future, learning more about what you're doing at Ashworth. But of course, if anyone is curious to learn more, you can always reach out to me, Apidae Consulting. We can post a link to it. And feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk with anyone and see if there's a way that maybe we can partner together.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth, again.
Thank you. Well, listeners, this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Always stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every Tuesday for your next Who Done It. This is Organizational Sherlocks closing today's case.
We'll see you all next time.